The system just cracked, and most people didn't even notice. Welcome to Prime Update, where you get new updates every day. This story isn't just about politics, it's about power, pressure, and the moment a system begins to crack. Because something happened in North America that few analysts expected to happen this fast. Donald Trump didn't just lose an argument with Canada, he didn't lose a press conference, he didn't lose a diplomatic exchange, he lost leverage. And in geopolitics, losing leverage is not a temporary problem. It's structural, permanent. The moment the system shifted, Donald Trump just lost Canada. Not diplomatically, not rhetorically, structurally, permanently. At least that is the unmistakable message delivered by Mark Carney in a declaration so sweeping, so deliberately constructed, and so strategically timed that sources inside Group of 7 governments described it within hours as the most significant realignment of North American energy architecture since the 1973 oil crisis. That phrase matters, because the 1973 oil crisis was not just an economic event. It was a moment when a superpower discovered something uncomfortable: dependence. And dependence in energy markets is not just economic vulnerability, it is strategic exposure. A declaration that changed the board. Carney did not threaten energy independence from the United States. He declared it past tense, done, operational, effective. And he didn't deliver that declaration with vague language or symbolic policy. He delivered it with infrastructure commitments, supply agreements, export market diversification, regulatory control over strategic resources. In other words, levers, real ones, the kind that move markets, the kind that force governments to react. And react they did. When the Prime Minister of Canada stood before Parliament and used the word independence in relation to energy markets, traders in New York, London, and Tokyo didn't treat it like a political speech. They treated it like a structural signal. Because when the world's largest supplier of energy to the United States says it is restructuring its export system, that is not rhetoric. That is geopolitical engineering. Trump's reaction. Of course, Donald Trump reacted. The reaction came fast, loud, and revealing. Within hours, Trump posted, "Canada just made the biggest mistake in their history. We don't need their energy. I will impose immediate 50% tariffs on all Canadian energy products." Strong words. But energy markets didn't panic about Canada. They panicked about America. Natural gas futures jumped. Heating oil surged. Utility stocks dropped. Why? Because threatening tariffs on energy you depend on doesn't punish the supplier. It punishes the buyer. And the numbers. Explain why Canada supplies roughly 60% of U.S. crude oil imports, natural gas to millions of American homes, hydroelectric power to multiple northeastern states. States like New York, Vermont, Maine, Minnesota. That electricity keeps lights on, that gas heats homes, that oil feeds refineries built specifically to process Canadian crude. Replacing that system is not a policy decision, it's an infrastructure problem. And infrastructure does not change quickly. Pipelines take years, terminals take years, supply chains take decades. What triggered the break? Tensions didn't start with Carney's speech. They started weeks earlier, in February 2026, when Trump began suggesting Canada should accept American terms on trade and governance. Then came a critical moment. An internal White House economic briefing outlining a scenario where the United States could use energy supply leverage in negotiations with Ottawa. In other words, energy as a pressure weapon. For Canada, that moment clarified something. If energy dependency can be used against you, then dependency must end. March 17th, 2026. That is when the real shift happened. Carney walked into the Canadian Parliament and delivered a 41-minute address. No advance text, no diplomatic briefing, no warning to Washington. Even the American embassy in Ottawa didn't see the speech beforehand. That silence was intentional. Silence can be a message. And this one said, Canada was done asking permission. The 7-point Sovereign Energy Declaration. Carney's speech introduced a 7-point policy architecture called the Sovereign Energy Declaration of 2026. Not symbolic, operational. Each point targeted a different part of the North American energy system. Each point changed incentives. Each point shifted leverage. 1. The Energy East pipeline. Canada announced accelerated construction of the Energy East pipeline corridor, a massive east-west pipeline allowing Alberta crude to reach the Atlantic coast. From there, global markets, Europe, Asia, anywhere, without touching American territory. Once built, this pipeline changes everything, because historically, Canadian oil flowed south, geography forced it. Energy East breaks that geography. 2. The European LNG deal. 2 days before the speech, Canada quietly signed a framework agreement with the European Union. The deal included long-term natural gas purchase commitments from Germany, France, Netherlands. Total volume, 12 billion cubic meters annually by 2031. Europe has been searching for alternatives since the Russian invasion of Ukraine disrupted global gas flows. Canada just offered one. 3. Hydroelectric power renegotiation. For decades, American northeastern states bought Canadian hydroelectric power at preferential prices. Those agreements are now under review. Future power? Market rates, competitive bids. American utilities no longer get automatic priority. Governors in multiple states received that news while the speech was still happening. Phones started ringing. 4. Critical minerals. Sovereignty. Canada also created a critical minerals sovereignty reserve. This gives the government power to control exports of lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earth elements. Those minerals power electric vehicles, semiconductors, defense technology. The Pentagon noticed immediately. So did the tech industry. 5. Indo-Pacific energy. Partnerships. Canada simultaneously signed energy cooperation agreements with Japan, South Korea, 2 of the world's largest LNG importers. Those deals anchor new export infrastructure on Canada's Pacific coast. Again, diversification. Again, leverage. A quick pause. Before we go further, if you're finding this analysis valuable and want to keep learning about the hidden forces shaping global events, take a moment to support the channel. Subscribe to Prime Update. It helps us continue bringing you deeper insights like this. Now let's continue. Because this story becomes even more serious. The countdown begins. 3 days after Carney's speech, a confidential analyst briefing circulated through several energy ministries. Parts of the document were leaked to reporters. One paragraph stood out. It read, "If Canada proceeds with infrastructure commitments already announced, the window for the United States to maintain structural energy leverage closes within 45 days. 45 days, not years, not decades, days. Why? Because once financing contracts are signed, once construction tenders are issued, once international purchase agreements activate, reversal becomes politically impossible. Why markets took this? Seriously, markets understand something politicians often ignore. Infrastructure creates reality. Once pipelines exist, they shape trade flows. Once LNG terminals operate, they lock in contracts. Once supply chains diversify, leverage disappears. This is exactly what happened during the 1973 oil crisis. When Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries cut supplies, the United States discovered how dangerous dependency could be. Canada watched that lesson closely and apparently decided to apply it. Trump's tariff threat. When Trump threatened a 50% tariff on Canadian energy, the strategy looked simple. Pressure Canada, force negotiation. But the supply geography made that strategy extremely risky because tariffs do not create new pipelines. They do not build LNG terminals. They do not magically produce alternative gas fields. What tariffs do create is something else: higher prices. American vulnerabilities. 3 areas are especially exposed. Home heating. Roughly 4.8 million households in the northeastern United States rely on natural gas tied to Canadian supply networks. Tariffs mean higher bills, immediately. Industrial energy manufacturing across the Midwest depends on cheap energy inputs: steel, chemicals, automotive, food processing. Raise energy prices and profit margins shrink. Defense supply chains. Critical minerals from Canada feed defense manufacturing, missile systems, radar technology, electronics. If those exports become restricted, American defense contractors face delays. Infrastructure is power. This is why Carney's strategy focused on infrastructure first. Not speeches, not diplomacy, pipelines, terminals, export corridors. Because infrastructure is leverage that cannot be reversed with tweets. Once built, it shapes economic geography for decades. Political shockwaves. Within days, governors from multiple states sent a joint letter to the White House. States included New York, Vermont, Maine, Minnesota, Massachusetts. The request was simple: pause the tariffs, start negotiations, because the energy system that powers their states cannot be replaced quickly. And now the 3 possible outcomes. At this point, the situation could move in 3 directions. 1. Fragile stability. Negotiations begin. Tariffs pause. Canada continues diversification quietly. Tensions cool, but the structural shift still happens. America loses leverage slowly. 2. Serious escalation. Tariffs proceed. Energy prices spike, markets react. Political pressure spreads across multiple states. Economic tensions escalate. 3. Strategic global reset. Canada fully transitions into a global energy exporter. Europe and Asia become permanent customers. North American energy geography is rewritten. And the United States discovers that its closest ally has become an independent energy power. The question that divides analysts: Was this simply a defensive move by Canada, or a calculated strategy to reshape global energy markets? Because if the Sovereign Energy Declaration succeeds, the balance of power inside North America changes, quietly but permanently. So here's the question. Was this a calculated move of leadership, or the first signal of a much larger global shift? Tell me what you think, because this debate is only beginning. If this update added value and helped expand your understanding, support the channel. Subscribe to Prime Update and stay informed. Thank you for watching.